The New Babylon, Chapter 8. Francine was still in the hallway with Kevin minutes later when the council came out of session. He looked up and watched as they filed past him. None of them made eye contact with him. He knew what that meant. As Isaac Rubens approached, he looked at Kevin and shook his head. Kevin, the council voted unanimously to allow the kid to stay with us if he wants to. Franny let out a yay when she heard this. Kevin, standing up, looked at Pastor Rubens and said, Sebastian. Isaac Rubens, with a confused look on his face, said, Excuse me? Kevin responded, The kid. His name is Sebastian. And he walked away. 150 miles away, in eastern central Pennsylvania, the granite rock face rose sharply toward the sky on the side of the interstate. Across both lanes, now overgrowing with grass and weeds from infrequent use, up on a knoll, the barrel of a .308 rifle pointed back at the rocky cliff. Concealed in the underbrush were two lone figures, one peering through the high-tech optics of the rifle. He watched as one man rappelled down the rock face on the other side of the highway. When he reached the bottom, he held the rope taut on belay and signaled up to the top. Immediately after, another individual rappelled down to join him. When the fourth member of the group reached the bottom, the first man unclipped the rope from his harness and pulled it back up and threw the carabiner on top, letting it drop in front of him, retrieving it and coiling it up and attaching it to his rucksack. The team did their best to conceal themselves in some bushes on the side of the highway, but they were still visible to the riflemen in the moonlit night. With his left hand, the rifleman tapped the button on his headset. Overwatch to Drifter 1. Copy? The response came back almost immediately. This is Drifter 1. We copy, Overwatch. You're loud and clear, sir. Drifter 1, I have eyes on. All clear. Proceed to rally point Victor Delta. The four climbers started to move east through the culvert adjacent to the eastbound lane of the interstate. They moved cautiously and deliberately. The group leader fingered his headset and responded, Rally point Victor Delta. Roger that, Overwatch. The rifleman added, God will direct your path, and Overwatch will cover your six. The group leader smiled and said, It's good to be among friends, Bryce. Bryce Leonard was an Army veteran. He was a highly decorated sniper from the original Desert Storm sandbox, and a pretty proficient medic as well. In civilian life after his discharge, he worked in law enforcement and disaster management for the county in which he resided. He could run a trauma drill as well as shoot an acorn out of a squirrel's paws at 200 yards. He and the scout that accompanied him slowly and methodically scanned the interstate and the adjacent areas to the west as their friends headed east toward the rally point. When enough time went by that Bryce was sure his friends were not being followed, they packed up and headed east themselves. As they walked east towards the rally point, the scout asked Bryce, Baby, you think Will and the kids are there yet? Bryce sighed and responded, I sure hope so. If not, we may have a long wait. They left 21 days ago, but it's a long walk down from Syracuse. I wish he wasn't such a stickler on protocol. I would love it if he broke long-range comm silence and let us know where they are. But I suppose since we haven't heard from him, in one respect, that's good news. So by the time we get there, they should be there. Bryce said it, more hopeful than certain. Bryce was starting to feel his frustration at Will's suggestion of having the entire team walk rather than drive to the rally point. Will had maintained that because of the martial law, the group would be able to fly under the radar easier on foot. He had watched for months before leaving Syracuse. He saw the drones and the manned aircraft flying the grid patterns overhead continuously. Manned aircraft was one thing. Will knew that there wasn't enough manpower to cover the whole area extensively enough to be effective. However, he knew that the drone cameras would be constantly feeding data back to his centrally located computers for collection, and he strongly suspected that they would have programming capable of initiating alarm protocols to notify ground troops of any traffic, of which there was now very little. Bryce knew it was the smart thing to do, but still, it was hard with a working truck in the barn and plenty of fuel in storage. He sighed again. Let's double time it to the rally point, Bear. I want to come in right on the team's heels. Just maintain enough distance to cover their backs. Bear nodded and picked up her stride to match her husband's. Isaac and John Allen sat around the council table discussing Sebastian and what his role in the community would be. Winston Carver was with them. Winston, along with his brother Clive, worked in both the kitchen and infirmary ministries. There they helped clean up. They carried sacks of food and washed pots and pans. They peeled potatoes and helped do other food prep for the meals. They mopped floors in the infirmary. They sat and monitored patients when needed. They took out the trash. Basically, they did whatever needed to be done, whenever and wherever it needed to be done between those two ministries. Clive was being trained to shoot and in martial arts and hand-to-hand combatives. He was being groomed to fill a vacancy on the security team, where he was now badly needed. John Allen spoke first. Winston, we want to assign a new member to work with you. He will take Clive's place so we can move him to security ASAP. This kid just came to us off the street. He's young, and little is known about him, other than his name, which is Sebastian. Winston shook his head in agreement. Okay, Mr. Allen, sounds like a plan to me. He smiled broadly, and Pastor Rubens couldn't help but smile back, and added, Winston, we want you to do more than just work with him. I would like to move him in with you, at least for now. He's new here, and frankly, he's very scared. You're a good man, Winston. You grew up in a good home, and being raised by Miss Mary, you're a good Christian man. I feel that you'll be very good influence on Sebastian, an influence that he desperately needs at this point. I would also like you to witness to him and tell him about the benefits of a life lived for the Lord. Try to get him to come to service with you on Sundays and Wednesday. I would love to see him accept Christ and get saved, and if he does, I can think of nobody better to disciple him than you, Winston. Winston smiled broadly again. Wow, thank you, Pastor, for having confidence in me to be able to accept such a responsibility. It would be an honor. Pastor Rubens smiled. I had a feeling I can count on you for this, Winston. Now, you know we can lead a horse to the life-giving waters of biblical salvation, but of course, we cannot force him to drink thereof. That is up to God. We will leave it in his capable hands. You just do what you can on this end, brother. Pastor smiled at Winston, who, as usual, smiled back. Then there was a gentle knock on the door. John Allen called out, Come in, Franny. Francine opened the door and stuck her head in before entering. Come in, please, John urged. Have a seat, Franny. We want to talk to you. She nodded and sat down at the long wooden table. John Allen told Francine about the plan to have Sebastian work with Winston. He said Franny, you seem to have a rapport with him. He's obviously and understandably scared. After all, you were the first one to get him to tell you his name. Franny, we would like you to come with us to introduce him to Winston. We would like you to be there when we explain that he will be living and working in the infirmary and kitchen with Winston. I think he trusts you. He likes you. John Allen smiled. And how could he not trust and like you, Franny? Francine smiled back at John Allen. She nodded. Of course I'll go with you, Mr. Allen. I like Sebastian, too. I'm glad he's staying here with us. Pastor smiled and nodded. He said to John, Let's get Sebastian a shower. Let him relax after in the rec room downstairs. That will give Winston time to get his place ready for a roommate, and we will tell him everything just before dinner. John nodded in agreement and went off to make the arrangements, as did Winston. Pastor smiled and said, Thanks, Franny. Everything's going to work out just fine for your new friend. Maybe you can spread the word among the young people to welcome him and be nice to him. Francine smiled in return and nodded. When John Allen, Pastor Rubens, and Francine went downstairs later to bring Sebastian a clean change of clothes, he was still sitting alone in the detention room. John Allen knocked and slowly opened the door to enter the room. When Sebastian saw him, the look on his face hardened. Pastor set the clothes down on the table and announced, Sebastian, I can imagine you're dying to take a shower and get cleaned up. Take these clothes, and Franny will wash what you're wearing for you. She will show you where the bathroom is with the shower in it. It's just down the hall. Then Francine walked into the room. When she smiled at Sebastian, his eyes softened, and he managed to smile back at her. Pastor said, After you shower, you can relax in the rec room and watch TV for a while. Franny will show you where that is, too. We will be back down to talk to you before we go up to eat dinner, Sebastian. Sebastian just looked at Pastor, then at John Allen. When he glanced over at Francine, she nodded as if to say, It's okay. Everything is going to be okay. Will was in fact several days behind schedule. He was about to cross the border from New York State into Pennsylvania, and his pace was slower than he would have liked it to be. It couldn't be helped, he thought to himself. Will was traveling with his two children. His daughter, Lindsay, just turned 16, and his son, Will Jr., was 14. They were tough kids and hadn't complained once during the journey. Will knew it was hard on them and slowed the pace a couple times to accommodate them. He struggled with being too harsh in his regiment and at the same time knowing that they had to stay moving. It was hard for him, too, to walk away from a fully functioning SUV and venture out on foot for the 200-plus mile trek. The Ford Excursion he left behind had 2 fuel tanks in it filled with 100 gallons of diesel, as well as 4 jerry cans attached to the rear bumper rack. He grimaced when he thought of rolling along at a comfortable speed with the AC blasting on high. Still, he knew he made the right decision. He heard the traffic reports of the few people that were prepared enough to still have fuel being stopped and arrested on the roads, seemingly randomly. Having seen the drones, he suspected, correctly, that the stops were anything but random. The intel was solid, and he was not about to take a chance, especially with his children with him. Come on, guys, he said. Let's try to do another couple of miles before making camp for the night.